It is very likely that you've made decisions following your gut, and you are sure that that was the right choice. Without being able to explain why, maybe you decided to avoid a meal that later gave someone else food poisoning, or you didn't trust someone who later turned out to be a scammer. In very simple words, having intuition means that one feels what one should do without being able to explain why. Intuition is not a sixth sense. It is a form of unconscious intelligence. The brain processes information by drawing on past experiences to make quick decisions. This ability has been key for human evolution, but the brain is an imperfect processor of information. Intuition can go wrong, and the consequences of blindly trusting it can be severe, particularly when used for decisions that impact a whole community or have an impact at a community level. Our thinking is subject to all sorts of biases, called cognitive bias, that operate at a subconscious level. Here are 5 types of cognitive bias and how we might avoid them. Confirmation bias. Think of a man who is absolutely convinced that vaccines are designed to cause harm. He sees himself as really well informed because he's always digging into information. But here's the thing, he's only ever searching for information that confirms what he already believes about vaccines. What this man experienced is called a confirmation bias. It occurs when a person looks for information that backs up their existing beliefs or assumptions, while dismissing information that challenges what they had already assumed to be true. This can lead to making decisions based on incomplete or skewed information. The availability bias, or the availability heuristic. Have you ever met someone who refuses to wear a seatbelt because they've never been in an accident, but that same person is terrified of a shark attack during their vacation because they've seen so many reports about shark attacks on the news? This kind of thinking is a perfect example of the availability bias. It occurs when a person guesses the frequency of an event based on how easily they can recall past examples of such an event. This bias can lead us to overestimating the likelihood of some events, like those that are vividly covered in the media, while underestimating more common events. Optimism bias. During one of the recent heat waves, I remember seeing 2 men in their 60s getting ready to play tennis on an open court. It was very hot, about 30 degrees, and a person approached them and said, "It's probably not a good idea to be playing tennis in this heat." But one of the men just smiled and replied, "Oh no, we're completely fine with the heat." It was as if they thought they had some sort of immunity to the harms. This is a classic example of optimism bias. It occurs when people perceive that they are at a lower risk than others of experiencing a negative event. In other words, they think bad things can happen to others, but not to themselves. This way of thinking can lead to a lack of preparedness and an increased vulnerability during actual events. Anchoring bias. The anchoring bias occurs when we rely on the first piece of information we are given about a topic, and we interpret new information from this reference point instead of seeing it objectively. You might see this in debates over GMOs. If people are first exposed to information claiming that GMOs are inherently dangerous, this initial belief acts as an anchor. As a result, they may resist new evidence showing that GMOs aren't inherently dangerous. This bias can prevent us from updating our beliefs, changing our opinions, and making informed decisions. Patterns in randomness. In Mexico City, there were severe earthquakes on September 19th in both 1985 and 2017. This led to some people to believe that earthquakes are more likely to occur in September, when they are indeed random and non-predictable events. Just because we see a pattern doesn't mean it's real. Our minds have the ability to recognize patterns. It's how the brain synthesizes information from the past, uses it to understand the present, and anticipate the future. But our unconscious desire to identify patterns makes us perceive them when they don't really exist. This can lead to erroneous conclusions and poor decision making. We don't advise that you ignore your intuition, but try not to rely exclusively on it. Remember all the ways in which our instincts can go wrong. Having risk know-how involves knowing which questions to ask, to have more than just your intuition when making decisions. Next time you or your community needs to make a decision, ask yourselves, have we checked all the evidence, even the evidence that contradicts our beliefs? Are we considering all relevant information, or just the most recent, or memorable? And is it possible that what we perceive as a pattern isn't actually one?